Mr. President.
The senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, thank you. Senator Roberts, thank you for your comments. I am nervous today, and more nervous now that I've heard you speak, because I'm concerned that this may be for the first time in our lives that I've ever spoken longer than you. That makes me nervous. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. Words spoken by Pat Roberts more than once, but on September 15th, 1958, age 22. Pat Roberts joined the Marine Corps, and he has lived by his oath, by his promise to do exactly that every day thereafter and in every job he pursued, and here in the Congress of the United States, in the House and Senate. He indicated he served as the Chief of Staff for Senator Frank Carlson, one of those Kansans who served in the United States Senate, so highly regarded even today. He served as the Chief of Staff for Congressman Keith Sebelius. I met Pat Roberts 50 years ago, in 1969. A few years later, in 1974, I became an intern in the office of Congressman Sebelius. Pat has been my boss for 45 years. And I describe Pat as our most common, when I describe Pat, I tell people our most common conversation is never spoken. It's symbols. Pat does this. Come here, sit down. And every time I tell Pat this, he, in his Jack Benny voice, will say, now cut that out. But for 45 years, come here, sit down. And Pat, while you discount that and I highlight it, it's been some of the most enjoyable time in my life where I've had the opportunity to be your friend and to listen to what you had to say. And I suppose if I thought long and hard, I might find something that wasn't good advice, but I can't remember it. So everything in those circumstances was something that I continue to value today. I learned something in every conversation. Knowing Pat for 50 years, I've told him that he just keeps me around. He puts up with me because I've at least heard of the people he knows. And he does know people. Pat and I both grew up in times of politics in which your relationships with voters, your relationships with constituents, your relationships with Kansans was paramount. Pat knew the school superintendent in every community. Pat knew the executive of the Chamber of Commerce, the newspaper editor. He knew the president of the County Farm Bureau. I don't know how many times I've heard Pat say that I'm going home and talk to the coffee klatch in Dodge City, or I'm going to sit on the wagon tongue and I'm going to hear from Kansans what they have to tell us. Politics, as you heard from Senator Roberts, is in his blood and in his family. Wes Roberts, the chairman of the Republican National Committee, Frankie Roberts, the staff person for Strom Thurmond. In his blood and in his family is not just politics, but public service. In 1980, Pat Roberts decided to be an office holder, not an office staffer. The first letter I ever wrote to an editor of a Kansas paper was to my hometown where his primary opponent lived. And I supported Pat Roberts in a letter to the editor when his opponent was somebody who was highly regarded and a friend of mine. But Pat Roberts' friendship and his commitment, who he is as a human being, and his sworn oath told me that Pat Roberts was the person I wanted to be my congressman. And the constituent in me said, this is the guy I want serving me and my fellow Kansans. He won that election in January of 1981 and became a House member representing the 1st District of Kansas, known in our state as the Big First. The geography of that district today, and almost true when Pat was the congressman, is the size of the state of Illinois. The largest city, Salina, then, population about 35,000. It is a rural place. And it fit the Pat Roberts mode of representation, which was, I know them and they know me. He was elected with a significant majority of voters. He won 7 times to be reelected to the House of Representatives. He never received less than 60% of the vote. And in his last election to the House of Representatives, received nearly 78% of Kansans' approval. Sitting on those wagon tongues and listening in those coffee klatches had its consequence. And it is the kind of politics that Pat described that I hope we return to, in which it's all about taking care of Kansans, taking care of Americans, setting aside our differences and finding common ground, just as Kansans, particularly rural Kansans, have to do in their community. On January the 3rd, 1997, Pat was sworn in as a member of this body. I asked Robba, my wife, what it is that I might say today, and she says, well, you know, I remember in about 1996, early, maybe late 1995, she answered the phone and it was Pat Roberts. And what he said was, tell Jerry to put his running shoes on. Pat Roberts gave me the advantage of knowing his plans well in advance of the public or potential opponents, and set the stage in my life as somebody who you'd look at and think, no chance of ever being a United States Senator, but Pat Roberts found value in me and gave me the opportunity to serve where I serve today. Never thought I would catch up with Pat in the House of Representatives. Never thought I would catch up with Pat Roberts in the United States Senate. But because he and his friends took an interest in me, and because this is America, that became possible. Pat is only the 34th Kansan to serve a term in the United States Senate. And I like that number. Pat will recognize that 34 is special to Kansans. We are the 34th state admitted to the Union, and he is the 34th senator to serve a term from Kansas in this body. Pat Roberts told me to put my running shoes on, gave me a chance, and we've had those running shoes on for a long time thereafter. Pat is that 4th-generation Kansan who knows us. I'd say one of his greatest contributions to our state, to the Midwest, and to the country has been his distinguished career in leadership in agriculture. The farm bills that he mentioned, the work with Democrats and Republicans coming together, fighting for competitive and fair markets for our producers, the support for crop insurance. There is no question but what Kansas, but American farmers, ranchers, and producers has a strong voice in Congress as a result of Pat Roberts being here. He is distinguished by being the first member of Congress to chair both the House and Senate Agriculture Committees. In the next Congress, we'll begin the process of writing another farm bill. And it will be the first farm bill since the Agricultural and Food Act of 1981 that will be written without Pat Roberts' direct influence. However, Senator Roberts' legacy and impact on farm policy, it will be felt for generations to come as a result of his work in the '96 Freedom to Farm Act, the 2000 Agricultural Risk Production Act that modernized crop insurance, and many, many other pieces of consequential legislation. In his early years in the Senate, as Senator Roberts indicated, he led the Senate Intelligence Committee. This was during the time of the 9/11 attacks. Under his leadership, the committee conducted a sweeping and exhausting review of U.S. intelligence, which led to critical reforms to put us in a better position to know more and to protect Americans better. That work on the intelligence reform earned him a spot in a very distinguished guest speaker program, the prestigious Landon Lecture Series at Kansas State University. Combining his experience in agriculture and intelligence and in defense, Senator Roberts has laid the groundwork for the National Bio and Agro Defense Facility at his alma mater in Manhattan, Kansas. It brings great opportunity to our state, and we are so pleased to have Pat's accomplishment benefit the country and our state for generations to come. Pat Roberts deserves great credit for the Eisenhower Memorial. I've been around this issue for a long time. It has been challenging from the get-go. Nothing was easy, and controversy apparently follows every new memorial on the Capitol grounds, on the National Mall. And I have no doubt, but in the absence of Pat's leadership, his bringing people together, and perhaps, yes, his sense of humor, the Kansas President Eisenhower would never be seen, honored, and respected at the memorial we now have. He, Senator Roberts, advocates for policies he believes in. He compromises when necessary, and he always has a way of bringing everyone together, often with a joke, ready to ease the tensions when things get stressful. His joke, I always used to tell him that I saw that once again you became the funniest member of Congress. You got an award, and he always would correct me, no, I'm not the funniest member, I'm the most humorous member. And so many times he's been designated the most humorous member of Congress. Some of the most important work he's done for Kansans won't be memorialized in laws passed or signed into law here in Washington, D.C., but the meaningful change that he made back home among the people that he and I care for and love. How about in the rural hospitals he fought to keep their doors open, or the family farms that are still operating because of decisions and efforts he made? He has continuously fought to get farmers and ranchers, to get rural communities, to get the people of Kansas the right resources at the right time. I've had the challenge of following in politics in my life, in both the House and the Senate, those humorous people, Pat Roberts being one. The greatest challenge probably for both of us is Bob Dole. How can you ever follow Bob Dole in any way, and how can you compete with his sense of humor and particularly his wit? So I asked Senator Dole what it is I might say on this floor to honor Pat Roberts. And as usual, he took my responsibilities away from me and said, here, just read this. So these are the words of Bob Dole. One of my first memories of Pat was when he worked for the late, great Senator Frank Carlson. Of course, that was well over 50 years ago when Pat was just a young child and I was, well, maybe a teenager. Pat has the best sense of humor of anyone in Congress. I'm not sure how he acquired it, but I know it serves him well today. Pat, I honestly don't know what it's like to be retired, but people tell me it's great. Be forewarned, though, the rest of the world doesn't operate exactly like the Senate. If anything goes wrong or breaks at home, your trusted chief of staff isn't on speed dial to put out the fires. Plus, there's nobody to dial your calls for you anyway. Put your alarm clock up for sale on eBay. One, somebody might out there want to buy a beat-up clock once owned by a famous senator. And two, you won't need to wake up early ever again in your life, unless you just want to go sit in the D.C. traffic for old time's sake. You'll have to brew your own coffee, so go buy one of those space-age looking contraptions or make friends with your local barista. You'll have to share elevators with the rest of the world now, so just stop looking for that senators only sign. Your grandkids are now your information technology department, so reward them accordingly, or if you want your computer to be used up and running, just ask Alexa. But in all seriousness, Pat, you've earned some time off for a job well done in Congress over these past 40 years. Kansas has benefited from your steadfast leadership. You care about the Sunflower State, and you care about our nation, and that's always been what matters most. Your strength of character, plain-spoken optimism, and determination to make a positive difference in people's lives, that's what people will remember about your legacy of public service here. You're a great American and a dear friend, and Elizabeth and I wish you nothing but the best for you and Frankie from here on out. One important point of clarification, though, the filibuster simply doesn't work at home. God bless America, Bob Dole. I know that all of us and Kansans have great regard for Senator Dole. I also know that Kansans and all of us have great regard for Pat Roberts. My guess, knowing Pat, is that his role model, the person he may admire the most, is that Kansan Dwight Eisenhower. And in the book, How Ike Led, which Pat gave us all a copy of, I read that Ike led with a sense of humor is part of the art of leadership, of getting along with people and getting things done. And he also said the supreme quality for leadership is unquestionably integrity. Without it, no real success is possible, no matter whether it is on a section gang, a football field, in the Army, or in an office. Pat Roberts, I have no doubt but what you've lived up to that role model, that Kansan that's esteemed around the world, and you've led like Ike led. I thank you and your staff for all you have done for Kansans and for America. I thank you what you have done for me and our team. Your mom, your dad that you say that got you started in this politics world. I knew your mom, I never met your dad. They'd be so proud of you for the service that you are completing this term. To Frankie and David and Ashley and Wesley, thank you for support, the engagement. It's not Pat Roberts, it's the family. And they've all been engaged in his politics and his public service day in and day out. Rob and I wish you and Frankie absolutely the best. I asked a Kansas farmer, told him what I was doing. I didn't ask him for any advice what to say. And his last comment, this is a rancher from Elkhart, he said, as a Kansan, I would want to know that my senator fought for my values in D.C., and that the senator did everything he could do to ensure our part of the world was a priority to the nation. To the rancher in Elkhart, Pat Roberts is exactly that, a Kansan who fought for our values at home in Washington and did everything he could do to ensure that our part of the world is not forgotten in this part of the world. So, Pat, I guess you said thank you to Kansans. You said thank you to this Senate. I think it's the time for me to say in return, on behalf of all Kansans, thank you for your service to our nation and to our state. A life being well lived. You are the example. Thank you.